Welcome to our Fertility Network webinar this evening. I'm Anya from Fertility Network, and today we're really pleased to be joined by Professor Tim Child, Medical Director at TFP Oxford Fertility, from Debbie Evans, Director of Nursing and Clinical Services at Herts in Essex. And we're going to be looking at, I think, one of the hottest topics that we've had for a long time in terms of webinars, the 2-week wait, and answering some questions on that. All of our webinars are free to attend. However, as a small charity, we do rely on donations to be able to offer all our services for free. So if you do feel able to make a small donation to help us, we would be really grateful. You can text donate to make things easier. So if you text FN UK 5 to 785 for a one-off donation of £5, or to donate any other amount, just text FN UK and then the number 785, and I'll post that in a minute in the chat box. We've been sent some questions in advance, but we'd really welcome your questions, especially as this is such an important issue. And you can put them in the Q&A box. I think we've already got one, which is wonderful. And we'll get through as many as we possibly can today. Rest assured, we won't read out any names. All the questions are anonymous. And we are recording today's webinar, so you'll be able to find it on our website really soon, normally within a couple of days. But for now, thank you both so much for being here and for your time this evening. It's a brilliant topic, so I'm really pleased we're covering it personally. As someone who went through fertility issues myself and who's now worked in the sector for a long time, I know just what an emotive topic this is, and that there's a lot of confusion around it and a lot of issues and theories. So I'd really love to hear from both of you to kick off about why this topic, why do you think it's attracted the interest it has this evening? Why is it so important? We'll start with Debbie.
Oh, the 2-week wait is that ever-ending question. I wish we had the finite answer that we could from clinic basic, because you've been so busy up until that point of pregnancy test, scans, appointments, admissions, egg collection, embryo transfer, everything, consents, telephone calls, messaging. It's been endless for several weeks, 4 or 6 weeks. And then suddenly you feel like you're on your own, and then you're there and you've just got to wait it out. There's no pushing it. People just say to us, why do I have to wait so long to do that test? Why can't I do it earlier? Surely there must be a mechanism of finding out if I'm pregnant sooner. It's just unbearable to make us sit and wait at home. But we need to wait that period. We need to get it right. And we need to fulfill or finish off that cycle in the correct way. So there is no right and wrong on what you can and can't do in that 2-week period. It purely is a waiting game. But from a clinic point of view, we say to you, look, we're here there for you. Most clinics will have answer phones that you can get through to. If you're sitting at home concerned and worried, you've got a symptom that wasn't there yesterday. Is that real? Am I imagining it? Talk to us, because that's what we're there for. Counselling support, FN UK, the forums that are out there. There's so much that's there, but don't sit at home and think that you're on your own, because you're not. It's the most important time when you should be talking to us, and no question is ever too silly. We always say that, because the more stressed you get, the more worried you get, the implications that are going to happen to you and your body and your family and everyone around you are going to be huge. So you need to take that little bit of responsibility and say, I'm not afraid to ask. Pick up the phone and talk to somebody and ask that question. Doesn't matter how silly it is.
That's such great advice.
Yeah,
that's such great advice, because I think you're so right. When it goes from that huge hive of activity and busyness and visits to what must feel like a total free falling, and it feels like complete lack of activity. I think that's such good advice to reach out during that time. And yeah, I definitely want to reiterate that. Tim, any other thoughts from you about why this matters?
I agree with everything that Debbie's just said. Obviously there's a lot of control before the 2-week wait. There's sort of control, and obviously a lot of the control might be from the clinic side in terms of spending lots of time working out what drug dose to get you on and when to do the egg collection and how to fertilize the eggs and how are we going to incubate everything and how many to put back. There's so many questions and some control there, and then there's a sort of silence almost. The embryo goes back and then is just sent off on some progesterone, and then okay, do your pregnancy test on this date. So I think it is that lack of control. I think a big issue which is that so much is not known about what you should and shouldn't do during that time. And so because because no one really knows from a scientific point of view exactly what should and shouldn't be done by the patient during that time, that's why you get different opinions from different nurses, doctors and clinics. And it's not that any of them are wrong, it's just that there are different opinions because there's a void really of what is the best way of doing things. And so I have absolutely no doubt that there's going to be things that the question will be asked and Debbie will say one thing and I'll say the other. Who's right? I've absolutely no idea. But in the end, the clinic has to try and be consistent so that if the patient phones up a clinic, at least everyone in that clinic is saying the same thing. But you might have a clinic half a mile down the road in London or 10 meters down the road in London that will probably say a completely different thing. And it's hard to say one is right and one is wrong. It's been a bit of a sort of a black box lack of research, I would say, in this whole area. I mean, more recently, lots of research on progesterone levels and things like that during the 2-week or during the luteal phase or the 2-week period. But again, that's quite sort of hardcore science. I mean, how much progesterone should there be? Once you start getting into the other side of things, should you do this, should you do that? Generally, people don't know.
It's interesting hearing you as clinicians saying that. You can then understand some of the confusion from the patient perspective, can't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when I'm asked that question, as I'm, obviously I've been asked these things many, many, many times and be asked them now, where we don't know, I will say we don't know, but you maybe do this, but hand on heart, I will say to the patient, that's my answer to you, but we don't really know. And often, so which probably could be seen as a bit of a cop-out, is in the future, if you do what you're wondering about doing and it doesn't work, just think back, do you think that was the right thing to do, even though I'm saying to you it is or it isn't? It's very difficult. Anyway, we'll come on to loads of questions now, and you'll see Debbie and I agreeing on some, and I'm sure disagreeing on some, and many of them throwing their hands up and saying, we've no idea.
Well, I just think even from a patient perspective, though, it's almost quite reassuring to hear not the confusion from you, but you can hear the difference of opinions, and it sounds like an area of developing understanding, and that's difficult for a patient group that really wants certainty all of the time. That's very, very hard. Would you say there are commonalities though with what you would both think these are absolute don't go-tos during the 2-week wait? What would be the things that you would definitely agree on? Don't do this.
Well, maybe we'll find out as the questions get asked, perhaps.
That is one of the questions. So that's one of the pre-submitted questions that's come in. And it was one that I think I had several patients, as soon as I said that we were doing this, they said, oh, please ask what some of the common themes would be that you would absolutely agree would be, don't do this during the 2-week wait.
I'll get Debbie to answer that.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever say don't do something.
Okay.
Because like Tim says, there's lots of things. One of the most common things is exercise. Can I exercise during the 2-week wait? Just recently, I had an aerobic instructor that runs 40 classes a week, and she said, can I continue to do my classes? I said, do you do them? Have you been doing them all during your treatment? She said, yes, right up until the day before egg collection, when I was told perhaps don't do so much abdominal work because it's going to be uncomfortable. Not that exercise is going to harm you or potentially harm the pregnancy. And if it's something that you naturally normally do every single day, it's part of your work, or you're an exercise freak that runs every day and does exercise every day, then that is okay to do so. And it's a very difficult one. I'm not going to say to somebody, if you've never exercised before, to suddenly go to the gym and you've got to start exercising. That's ridiculous. You need to be honest with yourselves and be reasonable with yourselves about what is practical and what is okay for you to do as that person, and what's normal for you to do. Because in essence, we want you to be as normal as possible in this period, because the more we give you to do, we're not going to say to you, take 2 weeks off work, lie in your bed for 2 weeks and don't do anything. We're not going to suggest that. Again, that's impractical. to give you any sort of information on that nature. You need to think about what's okay for you. And if that's what you normally naturally do, then that is okay. And that's always the advice that I'd give. So perhaps we'll agree on that, Tim, I'm sure. But, you know, don't suddenly go to the gym if you've never been there before.
So Tim, can I ask you on that then? Because actually that's one of the, I would say, common themes that I do hear from clinicians is what's normal, and almost don't deviate from that. Would you say that that's a good general rule?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I would basically agree with what Debbie just said. If I have a patient who hasn't really done much exercise and then says, well, I'm going to start training for a 10K after the embryo transfer, I think, well, you know, what's behind that? Why would you start doing that now? To me, I wouldn't start doing that. I'd leave that, because that's putting a different strain on your body for no particular benefit or reason. But absolutely, I agree that where there's something that you've been used to doing it and your body probably craves it, and I think someone like Debbie's patient just stopping exercising, if that is probably gets her going and keeps her going, probably would have, you know, it may have negative effects, maybe psychologically, I don't know, but there can't be, I don't think there'll be any positives in terms of stopping. And the difficulty thing always is, okay, there's exercise and there's exercise. So if someone is doing, you know, high impact stuff, significant high impact stuff, or, you know, or saying, well, I'm going to go and run a marathon. I'm booked into to run the London Marathon and I'm doing it 4 days after the embryo transfer. I will probably find it difficult to say that's a really good idea. It probably there'll be no ill effect. And if someone says, look, I've been waiting 5 years to run the London, I really want to do it. Okay. But I think being sensible, that's one way they probably would look back in the future if it didn't work. Say, well, you know, okay, maybe I could have delayed it. I probably wouldn't have done that.
So it's sticking to the routine in general, whatever your routine is, sounds the most beneficial. Are there things during this time that you think actually, yeah, do try and add that in? We've almost focused on what not to do by default. What would be the things that you think actually really helps?
I remember when I started working in IVF in the 1990s, I went to Canada for a couple of years and worked over there. And one of my colleagues was there at the same time as me was a very senior Turkish gynecologist from a very good Turkish IVF clinic. And at that time, we're talking sort of mid to late 90s, all of their patients had a compulsory 2-week bed rest.
Wow.
So this was not, I mean, back, you know, going further, you go back in time, this is not that a rare thing. So you would get people told to do that. So the thinking at the time in a lot of clinics, less so in the UK, but I'm fully aware there were UK clinics in the 90s that were suggesting this, was that this embryo had gone back then it would have been a day 2 embryo transfer for everyone, and that, you know, the woman should just lie there for 2 weeks, just, you know, obviously the mind would be thinking over time about what's going on or not going on. It must have been horrific. And in the end, there were studies done in the 1990s where women were randomized to have 2 weeks bed rest or 2 weeks normal living. And unsurprisingly, there was no difference in the live birth rate at all. So if you extrapolate that to thinking, well, complete bed rest didn't help an embryo implant. Well, you know, normal activity versus doing exercise, I don't think normal activity is going to help an embryo implant versus exercise. So probably for most of this stuff, it doesn't make a lot of difference.
Yeah. And I almost want to, you know, bring that out and really highlight that, because I think so often our patients, myself included, we're looking for that magic answer, that if we do this right, or if we definitely don't do that right, that's the magic thing that we need to find during this time. And actually what it seems like you're saying is to a large extent, there isn't, you know, a one size fits all answer. And actually that can be quite a relief to patients in a way.
Yeah, I agree. You know, another common thing that I get asked is, I want to chill in this 2 weeks, and my sister's bought me a massage, and they say, can I have a massage? Is that okay? Again, I'll say to them, well, you know, you need to let the masseur know that you might be in the early stages of pregnancy. Think about the aromatherapy oils, because some of those can be harmful in early pregnancy, but you're talking about early pregnancy. We haven't got to that point yet, but it's still getting yourself into that vein where, okay, I'm going to consider myself here and think about, am I potentially going to do harm by using some of these aromatherapy oils? I'm not an aromatherapist, and I cannot give you any advice on what oils can be used and can't be used, or what hair dye can be used and can't be used.
Yes.
You need to speak to the people that provide the oils or manufacture them. Look on the little feedback or the information around the subject that you're going to use. It's a difficult one. We get asked the most random questions.
Yes.
What can I, can I or can I not do? And it's always going to be a difficult one for us as clinicians, because we haven't got that magic answer for you. We'd love to say, yes, do this and yes, do that, and this will guarantee the outcome is going to be a positive one. We'd be all millionaires if we could do that.
I know. Absolutely. That's what I've always said to people. I wish we had that magic answer. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to go to them in a moment. But there was a couple of really interesting ones that came in. One was one that I hear very often about baths during the 2-week wait. And it says, I know you're not supposed to take hot baths when pregnant, but I just wanted to ask if, according to both of you, it does have any impact. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I've got a much more sort of scientific one, which I'm hoping you two understand much more than I do. But what are your thoughts on baths?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any clinical evidence out there to say having a hot bath is detrimental to you. If that's something your body is used to doing, then have your warm bath. We're not going to say don't sit in a hot bath because that's what you normally do and you've got to have a cold one. I don't know, Tim, do you agree?
Cold bath.
I agree. It's one of these, I mean, someone says, okay, I like scalding hot baths or something, probably would think, okay, well, maybe not, maybe not a great idea, and probably would say on the the day of the embryo transfer, maybe afterwards, maybe not ideal, whatever. But I think again, when you actually look at it, there's just no evidence that it causes any problems or anything at all. But if it's something that someone's worried about, if they're worried about it, then it doesn't matter. There are some things where patients are worried about things. It doesn't matter what we say; they're still worried about it, and that's they go, well, have showers rather than baths for a while if you're concerned about it, regardless of what people say to you. And again, I think it used to be much more, never go swimming, never go, don't have any baths or anything at all. But I think that's relaxed over the years, to be honest with you, as we've realised that it doesn't make any difference.
That's really reassuring. Thank you, because that is one of those ones that we get asked quite a lot, actually. Okay, I'm going to hit you with more.
One thing to say is, as I mentioned earlier on, because a lot of this stuff no one knows for sure. I have no doubt that there'll be people, in this meeting whose clinics are saying, don't have baths, don't go swimming. And can I say those clinics are wrong? No, I can't, and I'm sure Debbie can't. You can't say they're definitely wrong. So I think I do think it's one of these things where when people sign up to a clinic, they sort of my advice always is, okay, the belief of that clinic that you have signed up to, that you're putting your faith in that clinic.
Yeah,
they're giving you, go with that advice.
Yeah, there's a reassurance in that, isn't there? I think. So this was a great question that came in before we started. Why does the 2-week wait continue to be a thing when in reality FRER will be picking up positives 4 days post 5DT, even 3DB, I presume that's to do with readings post transfer, and a negative 7DP 5DT onwards means the round has failed. It seems unnecessarily cruel to insist on testing with a unit provided low sensitivity test 2 weeks after transfer, when other clinics do blood tests at 9 DP, and many of those women knew a week ago that it had failed. So I think what they're getting to, layman's terms for myself and for other people, is that concept of, do we really have to wait as long as we're doing? Can we not pick up hormone-wise earlier?
You go, Tim, and I'll follow you.
So I actually had to, because you very helpfully sent us that question too.
Yeah, thanks.
It's full of acronyms, many of which I didn't actually know what they were. I actually had to Google them.
Wow, okay.
Some of the DPT is all like forum acronyms, I think.
Okay.
It's how many days after this and that.
That's what I thought, yes.
So, but essentially, and I did actually go and look at some of the recent research on this as well, because there is actually stuff published in this area. So it's actually a very, very good question. So if I just also just summarize the question, I think just probably just get it straight in my head also. So people will be aware that usually a clinic will ask a patient to do a pregnancy test a certain number of days after the embryo transfer. Now, normally that's timed from when the egg collection might be. So in a fresh cycle, very often the traditional day for doing the pregnancy test is 16 days after the egg collection. So if you have a day 5 blastocyst transfer, then it might be 11 days after the blastocyst transfer. When we used to do day 3 and day 2, again, obviously it'd be more days afterwards. And that's because 16 days after the egg collection is sort of it sort of fits with when you might be doing a pregnancy test if you were getting pregnant naturally. So it's really all aimed around that, really, about when would a pregnancy level, an HCG level, be on the way up to be reliably catching it, to be saying, yes, I'm pregnant. So but it has been shown that, I guess there's two things here actually. So one is the person asking the question says, well, using an inaccurate urine pregnancy test as compared to a blood test. I think most clinics in the UK would be using a urine pregnancy test. Again, going back in previous years, many clinics, or probably all clinics, would be doing a blood test. But in our practice, if you're going to do a blood test, the woman has to come into the clinic for her pregnancy test. Whereas obviously doing a urine test, it can be done at home. So again, back when I started in IVF, we actually used to bring all the patients into the clinic for a urine pregnancy test, bizarrely. But it made more sense then to let people do that at home. And the modern urine pregnancy tests are very, very accurate. They pick up very low levels of HCG. So I think there's nothing wrong with doing a home urine pregnancy test at 16 days after egg collection or 11 or so days after a blastocyst transfer, whether that's in a fresh or a frozen cycle. The main part of the question was about, can you test early though? Now, problem with testing early with a urine test is they pick up such low levels of HCG that if you test too early, you might actually be picking up the late night trigger HCG, because that has a half-life of 5 days. So it actually takes a long time to disappear from the body. And if you test too early, you might get a positive that is nothing to do with a pregnancy. You're just measuring the drug level going down. Now, the studies that have been done have looked at whether a blood HCG test, which obviously with a blood test, you get a number back. So if you do 2 blood tests, you can look to see which way it's going. So there was a big study published last year from one of the Spanish groups that did look at this. And the person asking the question has been very specific with their dates. And it's almost like they've read the study, I think. It's the same days after the embryo transfer. And what the study showed was that if you do blood HCG levels at even just 4 days after the embryo transfer, it is somewhat predictive of clinical pregnancy, i.e. a heartbeat on scan weeks later. The problem is it's nowhere near as predictive as doing a test on the day that clinics would normally be asking you to do it. So what the study showed was that if you start testing at 4 days with a blood test, 4 days after embryo transfer, you might pick up really low levels of HCG. But in terms of that predicting what's going to happen, it's somewhat predictive. It's better than having 0 HCG, but it doesn't really tell you what's going to happen. And what they showed was that 4 days after the embryo transfer, or 7 days after the embryo transfer, 7 days was a bit better, 9 days was even better, but 11 days was the best, which is what we asked people to do. So the last line of all this is, yes, doing early tests is somewhat predictive, but nowhere near as predictive as doing it at the time that clinics generally will ask you to do it. And the concern raised in the study was, well, is it good or bad raising people's hopes and maybe false hopes by doing a really early test way before a normal pregnancy test would be shown as being positive? And is that good or bad? And there was a bit of an argument in the study about whether psychologically that was helpful or not. Obviously, at the end, it can't change the actual outcome of whether there's an ongoing pregnancy from this at all, but whether thinking there's something positive, is that good or not? And I think most clinics feel that raising false hope by having really early tiny positives is not beneficial overall for patients.
Especially when it's such a massive roller coaster anyway, isn't it? And I think to add a huge layer of uncertainty again, during the 2-week wait is very difficult. Debbie, any thoughts from you on this one?
Yeah, the only other thing to add is that we need to make clinical decisions, particularly if it's in the recipient or in frozen cycle, when the progesterone is very key. And if you get a false negative and you stop the progesterone, you are going to abandon that pregnancy. So when we're having to make clinical decisions at a very pointed time, we need to make sure that that time is correct so that we can make the right clinical decision. Because, you know, we don't want that on our conscience, that, you know, a potential pregnancy was there and now suddenly they're miscarrying because they haven't got enough progesterone on board.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the absolute top line on all of this is that the safest and most reassuring thing to do is stick to what we're doing, and just wait.
I think one thing just to follow on from what Debbie, the really important point actually is, again, going back to the really early days of IVF, way before Debbie and I were involved in it, because we're not into that, but the early days of IVF, they would do the egg collection, put the embryo back, and there was no luteal support given. So
wow.
Because progesterone comes from the ovaries after an egg collection, so they just put the embryos back, and then they realize you need to be giving something. So progesterone is obviously given in all fresh IVF cycles. Progesterone is given, and if you were to stop the progesterone before a normal positive pregnancy test, you know, day 16 after egg collection, if you were to stop the progesterone, you would reduce the chance of pregnancy, i.e. there's not enough natural HCG around. The HCG that comes from the pregnancy, the reason it's there is it goes to the ovaries and it drives the ovaries along to produce progesterone. That's what it's there for. But if you get to the day of the normal pregnancy test, you know, so 11 days after a blastocyst transfer in a fresh cycle, and you stop taking progesterone at that point, it makes no difference to success rates. Now, most clinics continue on with progesterone after that positive test. But in fact, the evidence suggests you don't need to, because there's enough HCG around from the pregnancy that it's making its own progesterone there. So a number of clinics still just stop everything on the day of the normal pregnancy test. And the reason I'm saying this is it just tells me again, like just Debbie said, that the problem with doing earlier and earlier tests is, well, what do you do with the information? You can't change the drugs. If you do, you risk losing absolutely everything because the pregnancy it's not supporting itself yet.
That's really helpful, thank you. Sort of linked onto that in terms of progesterone, in terms of supplements, we've had quite a lot of questions around, as you can understand, the concept of supplements, what's good, what's bad, what should we be taking during this time. And just one question, for example, are there certain supplements you should actually be stopping after a frozen embryo transfer, i.e. vitamin B complex, D, folic acid, inositol, magnesium powder, etc. So quite specific, but would you say there are supplements once you've had a transfer that you really need to be stopping? And then maybe we'll go on to look at what you should be taking.
There are certain supplements that you should not be stopping, such as folic acid, until 12 weeks of pregnancy. You need to be continuing that to help support the spinal. Progesterone you should not be stopping until you're told to do so. Other vitamins, minerals that you're taking for various amounts of reasons, contact who you're taking those from to decide whether they should be taken in early pregnancy or not. It's I'm not a firm believer in taking lots of supplements for the sake of taking them, for the pretense that it might well, but if it's a supplement that is needed because you've got a health condition that requires that, then you need to be talking to that clinician on whether that supplement is indeed safe in pregnancy.
Really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Debbie's absolutely right. So, you know, so folic acid, absolutely. I mean, anyone who's trying for a pregnancy, very important you're taking folic acid. And I mean, anything that's in Pregnacare or something like that, obviously you don't need to be stopping it. And so a lot of these things, you know, vitamin D, vitamin Bs, etc., those will be in stuff like Pregnacare. The only thing you've got to be very careful of is if you go and see someone who's prescribing you really high dose supplements, you don't really know what some of this stuff does. And sometimes patients will come in and give me a list of things saying, what about all this stuff here? And I haven't even heard of half of it. I've no idea, because they're not drugs, they're supplements. But if people are giving them out saying they have a beneficial effect, there has to be a flip side to that as well. There must be a potential negative effect. And that's where it's difficult as you know, someone who's not trained in that area to sort of be prescribing health food supplement type things, particularly high dose stuff, not even prescribing it, so you can buy it all yourself online. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I think again it goes back to that confusion that so many patients feel, don't they, that they're trying to navigate maybe a nutritionist, maybe a Chinese herbalist, acupuncturist. It's this jigsaw that they're putting together of their own you know, support during this time, and much of it I'm sure is very good, but it can be confusing, can't it? And to hear you as clinicians say that it can be confusing, again, I guess it's quite reassuring. We've got so many questions come in as well. Right, so I'll open up. Someone asking about running and swimming, and absolute no-goes, baths. This is a great one. I really want to hear both of your answers on this. If you have a lot of stress in your life, can this cause a miscarriage or for the pregnancy not to take?
There's the $1 million question.
It is, yeah, go on.
Stress has a huge impact on our bodies and our mental health and our whole well-being. And I always talk about making sure that you're fit for fertility, and that includes your mental health, your whole well-being, and your stress factors. To get yourself on that rocky road of fertility in the first place, you need to be stress-free, because adding stress into the whole railroad of fertility is setting yourself up for not necessarily failure, but for becoming a really uncomfortable situation that you're putting yourself through. So stress is really, really key to try and avoid. You know, don't suddenly put yourself on a massive project at work when you're just about to start your fertility treatment. Don't suddenly, you know, take on something new, or, you know, whatever that might be that's going to cause you anxiety and stress. It's very, very key for our whole well-being. So avoid it where possible.
That's really helpful about not taking on big projects. That is that prioritizing yourself again, isn't it? I think. Tim, anything from you on stress? I mean, I'm sure you could both do a 3-hour presentation on it, to be honest, but it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts.
I think you know, I think, of course it's important to try and minimize stress, but I think it's really also important to say that there's no evidence that stress is going to stop an embryo implanting or cause a miscarriage, because I think all that potentially does, if people suggest that's the case, is that it just layers on possibly guilt and concern for things where, again, there isn't any evidence. I mean, there have been studies done from war zones where people, it's life and death stress, they still get pregnant, they don't all have miscarriages. I think a lot for stress, a lot is how people cope with, you know, the ups and downs of an IVF cycle. So of course, having less stress and feeling more in control in your life is better going into an IVF cycle, where you get the good news, bad news of how many eggs, fertilization rate, embryo, all that sort of ups and downs, and then potentially a negative test at the end of it. So the more that people are able to cope with those ups and downs, the stronger they are. But having, you know, a really stressful time at work or whatever, that's not going to stop an IVF cycle working. It's not going to make an embryo come away from the endometrium.
That's so, honestly, that's so important for people to hear, isn't it? Because I think, going back to what we were talking about previously about looking for that, you know, quick fix, looking for that magic answer, there can also be a huge amount of self-blame and self-doubt. Oh, if only I'd not done this, or if, you know, if I'd not taken this supplement, etc. And I think it's more complex than that. So it's really great to hear you say that loud and clear. Thank you. About almost about success rates, but also, Debbie, totally taking on board what you said about where possible reducing or getting rid of stress. So would there be sort of any tips on managing anxiety levels during this period? What would be the things that you'd say to patients really helps?
Talk to us. If you're having problems, if you have started that big project and you can't get to your appointments, then talk to us. You know, most clinics will be amenable to changing appointments around to try and fit around you. Of course, most of us aren't 24-hour services, and we can't see you at 10 o'clock at night when you've finished work, but be reasonable and practical, and just talk, just communicate with your clinic, with your nurses, your doctors, whoever's going to support you through. Use the counselling services if you're really struggling, because it's just all becoming overwhelming or too much, because you're trying to fit all the jigsaw pieces in your life. then use those counselling services, use the forums to talk to, you know, people that are doing exactly the same as you are, that, you know, going through the same rocky road with their fertility journey. Talk to each other and just make sure you communicate. Don't suffer on your own, because that exacerbates the whole issue, and the stress and the anxiety rises, and it becomes overwhelming that you can't then fix. Most things are fixable if you just talk.
That's brilliant advice, and I think that feeds in so much to that, you know, how do we end the isolation that many people feel when going through this? So reaching out, using the counselling services. Tim, anything that you recommend to patients during this time to reduce anxiety levels?
I think when I was driving home from work earlier on, actually, there was something on the radio about sort of stress in the modern life and ways of trying to reduce it. And I was thinking about that, and I probably forgot there were 3 points that she was a psychologist was talking about.
I heard it was on Radio 4 just now. It was very good.
Yeah, and sort of 3 things. And from memory, one of them was sort of making time. We're very sort of we're built to be sociable creatures with other people, and there's it's obviously with social media it's made even worse depending on how you look at it. But take time out for yourself, whether that's going to walk or just sitting, reading a book or staring at the wall if you can, whatever that might be. So taking time out. Second thing was sleep. All of us are really bad at trying to get into a sleep schedule, but just really trying to focus on that. And the third one was that she said was just being in control of many things we can't control, but things we can control are what we eat, what we drink, and the exercise side of things we can control. So those 3 things she said were things really perhaps help.
There you go. Listening to Radio 4 on the way in is always useful. I think it was on about burnouts, wasn't it? So it was a very interesting one, and that's 3 really, really helpful points. Thank you. And what I love again from listening to both of you is that you can tell, again, there's no one size fits all. It's about managing your stress and what works for you rather than the person next to you. Another great question that's come in, is there any difference in success, IVF success, when using luteal progesterone pessaries rectally versus vaginally? So who would like to take that one?
Tim. Come on.
There's no difference. There's no difference. So a very quick answer.
Brilliant. Anything else? That's great. We've got enough questions. That's it? Yeah.
We always say personal preference, whatever's the easiest way for you to do it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nice and quick. I'm currently preparing for a frozen embryo transfer. What are your thoughts on drinking pomegranate juice and or beetroot juice, eating pineapple, etc. throughout the 2-week wait? Are these old wives' tales? This is something I've heard over the years. Pineapple juice especially seems to come in trends. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this, you two.
Wow, it's just things we get thrown at.
I know, you're having everything.
I have no idea the goodness within pineapple, pomegranates, or what was the other one? Cranberries? No.
Beetroot.
Beetroot. I have no idea whether that's going to have any detrimental or even good effect on your success rates. I doubt very much that it is. But if it, all I ever say to patients when they ask me these questions is, if you feel that that's going to support you and you enjoy having a glass of pineapple juice every day or a glass of beetroot juice, then have it. Unless it's going to do detrimental harm, which we don't, then of course you wouldn't. But if it's going to make you feel better and feel that, like Tim has said several times, that you're in control, that's your little bit of what you're able to do. You've got no control over what's happening in your body and the scans you've got to have and the egg collection and all those things. You've got no control there. If that's your control, then great.
Yeah,
and drink
that's great.
Not a problem.
You could combine all 3. Any other thoughts, Tim?
Nope.
No. Okay, so we're all off to make a smoothie in a moment. Fantastic. Great question here, and very much appreciated whoever's posted this one. As a partner, how can I support during the 2-week wait? And I think we could widen that out to partner, friend, caring relative as well. What are the good ways to support during this time?
Be involved. Take part in what's going on, and even if you can't get to every appointment, take an interest. I have patients that come into my scan room and they'll say, can I take a picture of my scan so I can take it back, and can I take a picture of the follicles that they're all electronic on screen, and can I take it back so my partner can see? Be involved. key.
Be involved. Brilliant. Anything else?
No, sage advice.
Yeah.
Sage advice. I always think as well, it's about asking whoever the person is what support looks like for them, so that it's, again, it goes back to that there isn't a one size fits all with support. It can be very easy to think this is probably what that person needs, and actually maybe it's very, very different.
Most clinics now use apps mainly for communication, but also to support them through cycle with drug informations, various different things on it. And we now make sure that the partner has their own individual login, so that they can see what's going on. They don't have to ask all the time, so they know that their partner is going in for a scan today. They'll know what drugs they need to take, so they get involved in that little way. And if their partner's having some sort of side effect of perhaps one of the drugs, they can look up the drugs themselves on their app and be part of that and say, well, look, I've just read up about the drug, that's normal. And so that they can get involved in ways like that. So that was important, that we involved the partners in that way.
That's lovely.
I guess the partner or friend or whoever just saying to the patient, how can I support you? Just asking that question, because there may be things that we wouldn't be obvious to us at all as people working in clinics, but that someone who's actually going through this might find extremely supportive, maybe by asking less about it. I mean, I guess a different way support can be positive, be maybe stepping back a bit. Horses for courses on that one.
Are there things that your clinics do specifically during the 2-week wait? I know when I worked for a fertility clinic a few years ago, we'd always try and make sure that we called everyone during their 2-week wait time. We didn't always get through, and we'd always follow up with an email. But are there things that you do? I mean, the app sounds incredible. Anything else that you do as a clinic?
You send a message. It's getting it right in the clinics, and I don't think any of us have cracked it just yet, because some people appreciate the call, some people don't want it at all.
Yeah,
just want to be left on their own to get on and just get themselves through it in their own ways. Some people will say, well, you didn't even call me. So from a clinic perspective, we can't always get it right. We'll try different methods, different ways. At the minute, we just send a text message, which seems to work through our app to say, we're here, we're thinking of you, we know you're 1 week in. If you've got any questions, just call us.
We did the same for a while. We did try calling people, and people, some patients didn't want to feel as though we were chasing them, or they got concerned, well, why are they calling us? There must be a problem with the embryos, or there's some problem here with the frozen embryos or something. So I have to say, I think one of the biggest changes in the sort of the work between the patient and the clinic has been this whole app thing. It's just revolutionized things, and patient portals, and I mean, all clinics will have their own ways of doing it, but most, not all, I know not all, but many clinics will have a patient portal. The patient can log in, and whether or not they can book their own appointments will vary from thing to thing. But in terms of getting the old phone chase that used to be the scourge doesn't really happen so much anymore, because we can send encrypted messages backwards and forwards, and we can be at home on call if there's a problem. I've just had a text in, actually, I've got to phone a patient straight after this now. But I've got access to that, whereas beforehand, all the notes would be in the clinic, and there was just no way of doing that.
Yeah, AI has revolutionized us.
It's incredible.
Sector, definitely. Giving us so much better access to everything. As Tim says, we can be at home, we're having Zoom calls, where we're able to communicate with people in such a different way. Much more, people sitting in their office can send a nice message through our app system without having to pick up a call in their busy office that they don't want all their colleagues to know that they're having fertility.
Yeah,
so much nicer.
That's really helpful, actually, and very encouraging. I think, as you both know, at Fertility Network, we've been doing a lot of work around workplace support over the last few years, and really proud of the work that we're doing at the moment. And that links really well, actually, into one of the questions that's come in. We've answered it in some ways, but I'd really love to focus in on the world of work, which says, how can you avoid stress at work during the 2-week wait? And a question very close to my heart: should organisations be giving 2 weeks paid time off for this? So Debbie, I'll start with you.
Put us on the spot. That's difficult for small offices, departments, whatever that workplace is. Of course, that's going to be difficult to manage, but have the conversation with if you need to. And that can be really difficult because it's very personal, it's very private. You don't want to tell the world and his wife that you're going to a fertility clinic for treatment, because that needs to be, you know, private to you. But if you don't get support from your workplace, how can you, if you want support rather, how can you expect them to help you if you don't talk to them?
Yeah.
You know, talk to your boss, let them know that you're having treatment, and even if they can't give you the 2 weeks off, they can certainly give you time off to go to your appointments in a reasonable time without stressing and thinking, oh my God, I can't get to my appointment because I've got a meeting, I'm going to miss my scan, and that makes so much more stress. You know, I've just seen a question there. Some people are saying that they wouldn't be able to trust their boss to be able to, but talk to another senior colleague, get support in some ways from your workplace. And I know that's really difficult. I haven't got the answer for that.
I don't think it's a quick answer at all, but we're working on it as a charity. We really are, and we would support any organisation, any individual in terms of this whole discussion. And we've just produced a whole load of fact sheets specifically to the workplace. So you could always download one of those and start the conversation with a boss, with an HR team member that way. Tim, anything you'd want to add about the
I guess the only thing is, you know, we've just come from talking about the 2-week wait and how having complete bed rest doesn't improve the success rate. So, you know, should everyone have 2 weeks off work after an embryo transfer? My view would be no, because I can't go from the one hand and say, that running doesn't cause a problem with embryo implanting, and I've said that stress doesn't cause an embryo implanting. We can't go from that to saying that everyone should have 2 weeks off work, because that to me just doesn't make any sense at all. And I know that I'm based in Oxford, there's lots and lots of hospitals in Oxford, so we have lots of lots of patients who come from the various hospitals. So the hospital HR team are very involved in this, and going back years and years ago, they looked at whether 2 weeks off work during IVF improved the success rates. You know, they got the occupational health clinicians involved in it, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't improve success rates, because otherwise, we've just been saying wouldn't make sense. So you know, again, I think as someone who again runs clinics, and if people are going through, you know, a couple of fresh and maybe 3 frozen cycles in a year, could I give people 10 weeks off work for that? Probably not. I think you mentioned that small organ. I mean, that would be difficult to justify. But I completely agree. You know, in terms of time off for egg collections and the day after because of the sedation, embryo transfer, being able to come to scan appointments, you know, all those sorts of things, absolutely, completely, that should be considered by HR departments and completely supported. And of course, if anyone is struggling with IVF and or gets a complication, OHSS or some sort of complication, absolutely, of course. But that's not the same as saying everyone should have 2 weeks off during the fresh or frozen IVF cycle.
And actually, to pick up on, I think it was you, Debbie, that said earlier about almost it being counterproductive, especially during the 2-week wait, to literally be doing nothing. There are times that work actually can be part of, if working well, can be a bit of an escape mentally. You know, if you can be working flexibly, actually it can be a positive. But, and I don't say that in a simplistic way, because we're really aware that work's not always the answer, but I think to take 2 weeks off at that stage could be difficult unless there's a medical reason.
Do what's right for you. And if you want to take 2 weeks off and go on a holiday with your partner, then fantastic, do that. If that's what's good for you, then great, go and do that. Make sure you bring your pregnancy test with you. But and
sun lotion, obviously. Yes. Fantastic.
On that note, actually, I think as well, because Debbie, I think if you know, I know Debbie sort of half jokingly going on holiday somewhere. Think about where you're going to go. Because I think, you know, going to Skegness for 2 weeks, fine, but you know, going somewhere exotic. Skegness is exotic or not, I don't know, but going somewhere exotic where maybe medical care isn't type great, and you develop some OHSS a week after, you want to be somewhere where you can be assessed if there is a complication, because if someone phones you up and they're somewhere exotic and they've got a temperature and bloating, and
Can you just explain, if people don't know what OHSS is, could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and it's the main medical complication for women going through IVF that can happen, and it's where the ovaries they over respond more than we would like to the drug stimulation, and that's why all clinics will be looking at your ovarian reserve, so FSH, antral follicle count, AMH, etc., and then choosing a drug dose for you to try and minimize the risk of you over responding. It comes on during the 2-week wait, so it comes on after the egg collection. So it's the main thing that clinics are watching out for during that during the time after the egg collection. You don't get it in frozen cycles; it's very much after an egg collection. That's
really helpful, and it's not very common, is my understanding.
It's low single figures percent. I mean, it's less common than it used to be, because the way that clinics do IVF now with short protocols and agonist triggers and freeze all, those 3 things have really pushed the rate down of severe OHSS. But you know, when anyone having a fresh IVF cycle, it will be on the consent form as a risk that it can happen in 1% or so of IVF cycles.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for explaining. That's really helpful. There's a question come in which I think will be a brief one, but I think is important to hear an answer for. Should embryo transfer from donor eggs make any difference?
In what context?
I'm presuming they mean success rates.
Well, it depends. If they're thinking about themselves, it depends on their age and the donor egg age. Yes, that will have an impact on the success rate. But it's it's a bit of a vague question.
Okay, if anyone wants to follow up on that one, I read it as success rates and sort of outcome at the end of the 2-week wait. But if there's anything anyone wants to add to that one, so lots of things about testing early, as we talked about earlier, and saying actually we feel in general that the testing time's about right. Just to pick up again, we have touched on this, but it'd be useful to clarify, would continuing progesterone after a positive test be harmful at all, as my clinic does advise continuing it?
Yes, it's not harmful, and we published something on we published about 3 years ago. We looked at all of the studies that had done, all the randomized studies where people having IVF had been told to had been randomized to either continue with progesterone or to take a placebo at different points from the positive test, or some studies stopped at 6 weeks of pregnancy, some at 8 weeks of pregnancy, and overall there was no downside of continuing, apart from the fact that continuing with drugs. If anything, it used to be thought that in women who had maybe a threatened miscarriage, who got pregnant naturally, it used to be thought, or years and years ago, it was thought that giving them progesterone was a good idea. And then for years and years, it was thought that giving progesterone was a complete waste of time. In the last 5 years, it's swung back a bit towards thinking maybe in early pregnancy, if there's a threatened miscarriage, that taking some progesterone might be a good idea. So I think from my point of view, it's probably tilted clinics to thinking, okay, we can stop on the day of the positive test, but there's no harm in continuing. And in Oxford, we used to stop until about 15 years ago. We always stopped on the day of the positive test. And what would happen would be you'd get patients phoning up in the evening, on the emergency call line with some bleeding at 6 weeks and saying, well, should I take some progesterone? We then got this whole conversation about progesterone or not. Now they're all on progesterone. It's much easier from the patient's point of view because they're on progesterone anyway. And obviously from the clinic point of view, well, we can't do any more because we're already on progesterone.
Anything to add, Debbie? That's really helpful though, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's the same. I mean, every clinic is going to have a slightly different protocol, and don't beat yourself up over that, and don't start comparing too much, because the clinics are doing it for their own right reasons and their own research. And some clinics have been around for many, many years, and they've, as Tim says, has yo-yoed backwards and forwards about what is best. First rule of medicine, do no harm, and we know that progesterone does no harm. But whether it's stopped at 7 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks isn't going to do you harm. Just be guided by your own clinic protocol. Really helpful, thank you. I think we've only got time for one more, but a quick question, which again, I'm sure could be a 3-hour discussion from both of you. Views on acupuncture pre and post embryo transfer. Just a light one to fire at you at the end. Just to throw that one in the bus. I'm going to go back to the same reasoning that I started with earlier. If that's something that is going to make you feel better and more get you through your cycle of treatment, then fantastic. Just make sure that it does no harm. I mean, I'm not a holistic therapist in any way, and I don't know enough about Reiki and acupuncture and Chinese, whatever it is. I can't make comments on it really, but just check with your therapist that what you're doing is okay in fertility treatment.
Yeah, I think acupuncture is an interesting one because that has been studied. Now, obviously, if you talk to an acupuncturist, every acupuncturist is going to say absolutely everyone should have acupuncture because it improves the success rate of IVF by 100%, whatever it might be. Of course, they really believe in it. In terms of the study side of things, it has been looked at where they've had 200 IVF patients and half of them have been randomized to have acupuncture. Half of them have been randomized to have something called sham acupuncture, which is where they have a needle with sort of a blunt tip on it. So something's being done, but it's not proper acupuncture. And if you put all the studies together, it shows that there is no increase in live birth rate with acupuncture. There's also no decrease. So when patients ask me about it, I say, well, if you feel better for having acupuncture, if you feel more in control, if you feel it helps you, if you feel it reduces your stress levels and everything, then that's a positive outcome. Because obviously live birth is the positive outcome we all want, but there's also other positive outcomes. But I have other patients who hate the thought of someone sticking a needle in them. So for them to have acupuncture because someone said it's going to help their success rate, when I think there's no evidence of that, for them it would increase their stress levels. So I'll say for them, don't have acupuncture. So this is where, like Debbie said, if it helps you personally, that's great, but don't do things because you think you have to do it, because a lot of these things don't actually make any difference.
I think so much of what you've covered tonight has been around the do no harm concept. That's a really, really good fundamental benchmark for so many of these quite specific questions. And I found that really, really helpful. Lots of do's, lots of don'ts. But I think an awful lot comes down to really staying in close communication with your clinic and taking advice from them, and then not everything working for everyone. So, what's going to work for you? Lovely last comment. I'm going to end on this one, actually. Someone says, thank you for this, feeling calmer just being here, being normal for me, and that is so helpful. Well, if we've done that for one person tonight, then job done. And you absolutely are normal, and everything that people have been writing here is very understandable. So I just really, really want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you, Debbie and Tim, for your time this evening, for your wisdom. Please do get in touch with us at Fertility Network if we can continue this discussion and help. I have a feeling we may need to do another webinar quite soon on this issue.
There's so many good questions there. You could go on hours.
I know. Tim, you have to go and make a phone call. We're not going to make you go on for hours. There you go.
We're going to sit together and write a paper on this now, aren't we, Tim?
Oh, good, great. Well, maybe not at 7:30 at night. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful. Some really nice comments coming in. And you're not on your own. Fertility Network are here for support in any way that we can be, so please do reach out. And thank you both so much for your time this evening. We're going to let Tim go and continue his work this evening. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Good luck, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Anya.
Thank you.